one of my favorite founders in our current portfolio tells the story that a dorm room fund alum, Yewande Alade, literally was sitting next to him in a conference room, like listening to him talk about his company, and she just like burst through the door and was like, "Hey, I'm Yewande. What are you building?"
Welcome to Venture Voices, where we interview emerging managers within venture capital. I'm Richard Kerby, a partner at Eco Ventures, and today we have the pleasure of having Molly Fowler from Dorm Room Fund. Molly, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Rich.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess, let's kick things off, I guess kind of from the beginning, tell us about like what Dorm Room Fund is and how do you support student entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so DRF is pretty special. We've been around for 10 years now, and really was born out of sort of stroke of genius of Josh Koppelman, who was the founder of First Round Capital. He himself was a founder when he was a junior at Penn. He started a company that he ended up taking public. And when I think Josh and Bill Trenchard, another partner at First Round, also started a really successful company that he sold to Microsoft when he was at Cornell. Haley Barna obviously famously started Birchbox when she was at HBS. And so I think all of those guys were sort of sitting around thinking like, when you look at the top performing tech companies over time, there's just an insane overrepresentation of student founders in that group, right? So obviously, famously, Facebook and Google and Snapchat, but, things like Microsoft, things like, FedEx, for Christ's sake. Like, so, and there was this recognition that like, in so many ways, these students on campus, it's essentially like a crucible for creating companies. It's a real unfair advantage. There's time, there's resources, there's talent, and especially at moments like what we're having right now, where there's brand new technologies. There's this incredibly interesting leveling of the playing field, and so the question was, how do we find those amazing student founders who are going to create industry-changing businesses and find them before they enter the pitch competitions and the YCs of the world and all those sort of standard routines, and give them not just a little bit of cash to help them get rolling, but help to actually start their businesses in meaningful ways. And so, I know you also work with early stage founders, Rich, and so there's so many of those like dance steps that are repeatable, and you can sort of skip steps and avoid mistakes. And how the hell do I find, health insurance for my team and things like that? And so I think there was this recognition that there was a gap in the market, that there really wasn't at the time in 2012 a ton of capital on campus. There was an expectation that you had to drop out. And I think there was also an acknowledgement that it was increasingly cheap to start businesses, right? You didn't have to set up servers anymore. You could, spin up an AWS instance and build something. And so DRF was founded with the idea that with a little bit of capital, some know-how, and this really clever, really unique perspective on how to source opportunities and amazing founders to back, that we could help some of the best of the new generation start their businesses and grow better and faster. So that's what we've been doing for the last 10 years. And we still are on campus today and investing in the best student founders, whether they're undergrad all the way up through, MBAs and PhDs and master's students and all of the above.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, it definitely resonates the whole having access to time piece because as a college student, I'm sure many of us were wasting time away doing many things we shouldn't, and so but a few folks were dedicated enough to
Yeah,
build
I was drinking
companies.
beers, but other people were doing much more clever stuff at their time.
Exactly. And you mentioned, yes, back to 2012 of the beginning of DRF. I guess how has the startup ecosystem changed for student entrepreneurs, over a decade now, and how has DRF adapted to those changes as well?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the whole ecosystem has changed so dramatically since we started. When we began, there really wasn't other stuff on campus to help these founders build. It was still kind of, it wasn't weird to be a founder, but it wasn't like part of the cultural zeitgeist yet. And I think what we've seen in the last 10 years is that there's been this arms race by universities to create these tools and products and centers and resources for these students that are building companies. and that entrepreneurship has become like the must-have at the top universities. And so I think what's really changed is that DRF definitely is no longer sort of the only capital on campus, which I think is great, right? Because I think increasingly students have access to non-dilutive funding, they have access to support. There's all these sort of famously like, pitch competitions that we all know and love. And so I think, it's been really great because I think number one, it's increased the number of people who can think of themselves as founders, which I think is a boon to the industry. But on the other hand, I think it's made it so that like there are a lot more like what we like to call tourist founders, that maybe are trying on the entrepreneurship thing before they go back to their jobs in consulting or banking or whatever it is that folks do after grad. And so I think for DRF, I think number one, the things that have changed for us is like it's not really capital anymore, right? Like money is green and there's lots of it all over the place, and it's important, right? You need people who are willing to take bold bets on brand new products. But I think what's become increasingly important and increasingly a strength of Dormer Fund is that we have this giant network, right? We have these amazing new LPs. We have these, incredible alumni from all the way to 10 years ago, right? And who have themselves gone on to become partners at big funds and, founders of billion-dollar companies and things like that. And so I think there's this recognition that, between the DRF alumni and the DRF founder network and the alum and all of the sort of incredible investors that are around the table, folks like you, who spend their time with the community, that's really the driver of the DRF value today, right? Is less just that capital and more, how do we help give you an unfair advantage? I think the other thing that's changed is that students have become much more savvy, right? When it comes to the entrepreneurship and VC ecosystem, right? No longer is it like, well, what the hell is venture capital? It's like, you can go on everybody's blog and read the details, and there's all these great, venture deals will tell you exactly how to raise your round. And so I think it's more, there's definitely still some help that we do on the fundraising side, but I think increasingly it's who's the right partner for me, right? And who, how can I get introduced to the right kind of investor when I am ready to raise capital, as opposed to like, how do I raise capital, right? So I think it's just an evolution of the ecosystem, and I think DRF is pretty uniquely positioned to help those increasingly savvy founders find their way.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I think, it goes to the differentiation piece around DRF versus the other kind of capital providers to students, and the community network that one can build over, a decade is pretty powerful.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, and what's been really cool is that since we've gone independent from First Round, First Round's been an incredible partner and has stayed an incredible partner, right, to us. But I think what's been really amazing is that it's allowed us to diversify the people that we've brought in that are sitting around the table, right? That not only do we have the incredible partners there, but we also have folks like Anne Muraco and Mike at Floodgate, right? We've got the Quiet Capital team. We've got, institutional investors. We've got corporate investors. And so people who've really done the dance and done it for a long time and done it from different angles. And, I know you guys have been so helpful on that front too. And so I think that's really helped us to like turn up the volume on how we can help founders.
Yeah, that makes sense there. And I guess, looking back at these student entrepreneurs now, what are the biggest challenges that they face today, and how, does DRF help them overcome that?
Yeah, I think like I was thinking about this, before we talked, and I think the biggest problem that student founders are facing right now is kind of non-obvious, which is that I think in the last couple of months, right, or maybe 18 months or 12 months, that there's been this sense of like anybody who's raising capital, unless you're like a straight AI company, that like you're insane. Like, why would you raise capital in an environment like this, right? And I think the thing that we all forget is that student founders are tied to really different variables than, your average software engineer who's sitting at Stripe, right? Like for folks like that, it's like, I've got this great gig, the economy's wacky, why would I stop what I'm doing now? Like, I've got this cool thing I can build on the side. I'm just going to keep it like on the low for a little while longer, right? Wait for the economy to get better. Students, on the other hand, like when they're starting companies, it's, it's dictated by when they get there and when they graduate, right? Like
Mhm.
they're not like, I'm gonna wait until the economy gets better. It's like, no, I'm a junior at MIT, or like I'm a first year at GSB, and it's like I'm here to build, and I have this insane set of resources around me, and I have this really special time. And so they're gonna build whether or not the economy is in good shape. And so I think the thing that student founders need right now is an acknowledgement from the rest of the venture ecosystem that they aren't lesser quality because they're fundraising right now, right? And an acknowledgement that like their timelines are a little bit different. And in fact, my hunch is that we actually might see more student founders over the next, 12 to 18 months because of the state of the economy, right? That more people will go back to school because it feels
Yeah.
like a safe time to do it. And in fact, we've seen DRF's deal flow has stayed really flat while a lot of the ecosystem saw a big dip in the last year. And so I think like the data backs it up. And so I think my request to folks like you and to the rest of the, venture ecosystem, like they're not numbnuts if they're raising right now. It's they're building something awesome and they need some capital to do the next thing, right?
There you go. Yeah. Even in this market, continue to fund student entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that you kind of put on there too is that the risk tolerance is going to be
Yeah.
different for a student founder, whether they're an undergrad and have like, no responsibilities or family or children.
Totally.
Obviously have student debt, but like you're not thinking about that then. And so they've got those lack of responsibilities enables them to take more risk, and the time piece too, I think is critical, as you mentioned before.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like, I think risk tolerance is one thing. And I think there are some founders for whom like that kind of risk is really hard to take, right? Like if you're coming from a low income background, or maybe you're a first gen college student or something
Mhm.
like that, there's a lot of pressure on you to make
For
money. And
sure.
so like one of the things that I have been talking to student founders about is that it's okay to take a salary as a founder, right? So that's sort of a separate thing. But the other thing that I would say that's really interesting for these founders right now is that I completely lost my train of thought. Fuck, we'll come back to
No worries. We'll come back to that. But I guess one other question to help, I think, like folks qualify, or have a better sense of how one qualifies for a DRF deal.
Yeah.
Is it like the CEO has to be a current student, like anyone, the team that's founding has to be a current. So, how should we think about like what qualifies someone to be able to take capital from DRF?
Yeah, I think so from a brass tacks perspective, it's pretty simple. If you are enrolled or have been enrolled in the last year in a higher education institution, right? So we're not talking high schoolers, we're talking like college and north, right? Or if you're on a gap year or something like that, then you're eligible. And there just has to be one member of the founding team that fits that requirement, right? From a deal taste perspective, right? Like we like founders that have gone insanely deep, right, on a topic. So they've gotten crazy curious about something. And what's really cool is that like it doesn't always have to be like an engineer who's built the same kind of product before in a different setting. It sometimes is someone who's done something completely unreasonable to get to be an expert in that space, right? So the my favorite example in the dormant fund portfolio, because it's a little wacky, is that is a founder that came out of Harvard undergrad who dropped out of school for a little while to become the youngest registered undertaker in the and funeral director in the history of California, because he wants to overhaul the death industry, right? And like that's the kind of like insanity that we look for. And I think that that's what's really special about working with student founders and with student investors, frankly, is that they are completely willing to take really, really big swings, right? And that there isn't this entrenchment in the way things are done, or sort of this jadedness about like, oh, well, that won't work because of whatever, and you and I are in the business of outliers, right? A home run is a fundamentally industry defining business. And so when you have this population of humans that are willing to take a huge swing on something absolutely that you and I can't see and that they're seeing around the corner, that's the kind of thing that changes the world, and that returns funds, and that makes our industry the famous R&D for the US economy that it's become. And I think that dorm room fund is uniquely positioned to find those people on both sides in terms of both our student
Mhm.
investors and our student founders.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. I mean, it sounds like this founder literally went 6 feet under to kind of get his business started. So that's impressive.
Yeah. That's a good tagline. I'm gonna give that to him.
There you go. No need to have it trademarked on mine. It's all yours.
There you go.
And then yeah, I guess so now I have a good sense of what one needs to have on the team structure to kind of qualify for a DRF. How do you all think about then like evaluating opportunities once they've made that qualification?
Yeah, so we have a pretty special and unique process that we use here at DRF. And again, I think this is one of our unfair advantages is that, you know, as I've said, it's become more popular to become a founder, right? And so there is this sort of founder machine that's evolving at some of the schools that we operate at. And so and sort of going all the way back to DRF's original DNA, our perspective was we want to find the founders that are maniacal and obsessive about whatever it is they're building. And we want to get to know them even before they've gone to the entrepreneurship center or they've gone to, an accelerator or all of those types of things. And so our perspective there was, we're going to be a lot better served finding those people if we find really hyper connected, super high horsepower students that are on campus who are going to be the ones that help us find those founders, right? And so what was totally radical about how DRF is structured is that instead of having, a partner and some associates or whatever who are doing the, campus strategy, we actually have a team of investing students, right? And so what we do is we each fall go out and pick 30 students from around the country. And those folks join the DRF team as investors. And we look for really broad qualifications for the team because we think of each of our 4 regional teams as a cohort, right? So we always have super technical folks on the team. We'll have, experienced business people. We'll have people who've gotten some, venture experience in their life. We'll have some brand newbies to the venture ecosystem. We usually will have a couple of folks who are going to be founders or have been founders. And so we create these amazing teams of these just incredible students who then serve out the rest of their, school time on the dorm room fund team as investors. And what's really special for them is that they get access to really meaningful capital, right? I mean, you and I have both sat on the investor side of the table. And so, there's a huge difference between going up to a founder and being like, hey, how can I help? And going up to a founder and being like, hey, how can I help? And oh, by the way, I have access to this capital that can really help you grow faster, right? And so they get the opportunity to invest regardless of whether or not they have access to that kind of capital on their own. And the other thing that they also get the opportunity to do is, number one, learn from each other. Number two, they get to work with all of the incredible humans that are in the dorm room fund ecosystem. And we build a program specifically for the newbies every year where we bring in some of the best in the business to come teach them the fundamentals of venture and all about founding and different, areas of focus. And so that it's really becomes an incredible on-ramp to the ecosystem, whether they're going to be a founder or an investor after they graduate. And so basically the model is that usually those folks are serving around 2 years. And so as they graduate, we will replace, a chunk of the team each year with another incredible set of humans. And when I say incredible, like the weekend that we do the final selection, my sister-in-law calls we all feel bad about ourselves weekend because you're sitting around with these resumes and it's like folks that have, launched things into space at NASA and helped discover a cancer curing drug and built a humanoid robot all by themselves or decided they wanted to be firebenders and so they're going to build a product that allows you to literally throw flint. The shit that these folks have done is just insane, not to mention seasoned Nike executives and venture VPs and things like that. And so we get to work with them and they're going out and meeting these founders before they're doing anything. So it's it's the folks you're in, Greek life with and the folks you're in class with and the folks that you take lab with. And you had lunch with that guy the other day. One of my favorite founders in our current portfolio tells the story that a dorm room fund alum, Yewande Alade, literally was sitting next to him in a conference room, like listening to him talk about his company, and she just like burst through the door and was like, "Hey, I'm Yewande. What are you building?" Like, so it's it gives us a really broad network, a deep network, and an unfair advantage at finding these really incredible humans, way
Yeah.
before anybody else.
Yeah, and I feel like each subsequent class of students makes you wonder how we have our own jobs. And so hopefully we
Oh,
can keep them for a little longer.
Rich, I'm just like the thirstiest human alive. I just want to be in a room with other smart people, and dorm room fund is the perfect way to do it.
Yeah, yeah, and for listeners, I've done one of the sessions with the cohorts, and like I'm just amazed just the quality of questions they ask too. I'm like, how do you even know these things when you're like 20 years old or whatnot? And so it's super impressive the kind of cohort of students you've gathered there. One kind of follow-up question there is you mentioned each year 30 students are kind of part of the dorm room team.
Yeah.
Is it one per school? Can they like say yes to a deal on their own? How does that process work?
Yeah, good question. So, generally speaking, we will have one-ish student per school. We have a set of schools that we've existed at forever. And historically, pre-pandemic, Dorm Room Fund only operated in 4 cities. So, Boston, New York, San Francisco, and Philadelphia. And so the idea was that we only had students at universities that were in those 4 places, but that founders from all over the country could apply. During the pandemic, we realized that there was some growing pains while we figured it out, but it was really an opportunity for us because it allowed us to bring on for the first time remote student investment partners from schools that we hadn't historically been able to include because of the in-person component of the team meetings. And so for the first time, we've got somebody at University of Washington in Seattle, we've got someone at USC, we've got someone in Texas, right? We've got folks down at Georgia Tech, we've got some folks in the Research Triangle at Duke. And so the ability to sort of expand the dorm room fund ecosystem has been really huge for us. And so it's allowed us to cover even more of those sort of top entrepreneurship ecosystems, while still having the ability to capture opportunities from all around the country because of our network, because of our online application. Any founder at any school can apply online to Dorm Room Fund, and we take those inbounds very, very seriously. And so what's really cool is that gives us a huge range that we had somewhat before, but have really been able to like explore and explode from that. And then in terms of the investing process, so each of the 4 teams operates sort of independently, and so the process looks a lot. It was modeled off of first rounds process, right? And obviously things evolve in over the years, but a founder will come into DRF through one of a couple of different pipelines, right? There's sort of the inbound from our website, there's the sourced opportunities from the students on the team, and then of course there's the referrals that come from my universe and my colleague Caroline's universe and our alumni and our founders and all that stuff. And then founders will meet with 2 members of the local team, of the regional team. And then if those 2 members of the team are excited, they will write up a memo, share it with the rest of the team. Everybody will do diligence together. The founder will come in and pitch to that student regional team, the whole team, as a final process, and they'll do a little bit more diligence, and then they'll make a decision about whether or not to invest. And then what's really great is that gives me the opportunity to play along as the process goes along. And then when it comes down to the negotiation of, and making sure that we're signing the safes and all of that stuff, that's done by me for each founder. So I get to play a role and meet everybody along the way too. So it's a pretty cool process. And we invest somewhere between like 20 and 40 founders a school year. And then we do a special thing where we bring everybody together for a sort of, Navy SEAL squad over the summer. And that's my favorite too, because I get to set in on all the investment meetings in the summer. So that's my favorite.
Nice.
But yeah, it's a really special model. And the other thing, it sort of goes back to that thing we were talking about, which is, these student investors are not jaded. They're not doing pattern matching. And I say that in the negative way, right? It's not like, oh, this is Uber for X or whatever, right? They're like, oh, this is cool. And then they'll go out and talk to the best of the best of the best. And then they'll be like, oh, yeah, this is really cool. And so they'll take these huge bets that end up being incredibly successful. So the nice thing being 10 years in is we have some data to show that the model's working. So
Yeah, and I imagine too, you're so long in this program now too that I'm sure some founders have now on their second or even third company, and so taking the learnings from the first, applying it going forward, and seeing them, continue to be successful, which is, I'm sure, awesome for you to see.
totally. And that's one thing that we've been really excited about doing as part of our new independent fund has been that it's a little bit bigger of a fund than historically we've had. And so it's given us the opportunity to do some investing into alumni, Dormer Fund alumni, whether they are alums of the investing program or, to your point, founders that are starting company number 2. And so there's a company that's going to be launching in the next couple of days, so I won't tell you who, but we got into this, he let us into his very hot round that, of course, 75% of our co-investors were Dormer Fund alums in some way or another. And we're really excited, to be able to do that kind of thing where we're playing a small role in round 2 because these founders have built and learned and grown with us. So it's
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah, I'm sure they also just have like obviously enjoyed the experience previously, have a loyalty to DRF and want to make sure to include you, which is also important.
For sure. Yeah.
Nice. And yeah, imagine like the student entrepreneur is very different than the non-student entrepreneur. And so like what are things or I guess like suggestions you give to aspiring entrepreneurs that are student entrepreneurs that, maybe, well aware to me and you, but not to them.
Yeah. One thing that I think that a mistake or that I see first time founders make, especially right now, given the sort of froth around AI land, is optimizing for valuation as opposed to investor, right? And like, I'm not suggesting that founders take a shitty valuation to work with somebody, right? Like that matters, and your equity is the most important thing that you have, and so you should be ruthless about who you give that to. But I think sometimes people get caught in this trap where it's like, oh, but they're willing to give me this crazy sky high valuation, like why wouldn't I go with that person? And the answer is like there are scenarios in which you regardless of the fundraise, you want to bring the best partner you possibly can to the table with you. And like I think you and I know, because we're on the other side of this, that an investing relationship, a VC to a founder, that's like a marriage, right? Like if I'm like, oh, Rich is a jerk, like, I hate working with him, I can't just dump you if you're on my cap table, right? You're around. And so I think the important thing that I always encourage founders to do is, number one, do a ton of back channeling on who's investing in them. And that's something that we have a little bit of a little special sauce because we've got our crew to help with that, our huge network. But, definitely back channel who's investing in you. Think a lot about what that founder is bringing or that investor is bringing to the table. And in terms of not just capital, but like resources and intros and know-how and experience. Like I think this is something that you and Rick do so well, which is that you guys go so deep with your founders and roll up your sleeves. And so, looking for those kinds of partners is really important. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing that I encourage founders to do is to get smart about cap table math. That, I sound like a broken record, but I think everyone who's building a company should read venture deals. It is dry as hell, it is like a reference text. But if you read that shit, like you will understand, even if some of the pieces have changed a little bit, they do a pretty good job of updating that. But, even if there's like something that's come into favor or whatever, it gives you a sense of what the moving pieces are and where you can negotiate. And so I like encourage founders to read that. And the last thing I would say is like, be really intentional when you raise, right? Like, again, like your equity is your most powerful leverage, right? And so when you're exchanging that for help, be really thoughtful about when and why and for what and how much. And and not to say like, that, and make sure when you get on the venture a hamster wheel
Hmm.
that you're doing it for the right reasons. Like I think sometimes people think, oh, I'll just raise this round and then go build this business. It's like, no, once you start the venture machine rolling, people have expectations. And so I think, helping founders run the fundraising dances is one of the ways that I think I can
Hmm.
personally help a lot of the Dormer Fund founders, because I think there's just earned knowledge that you and I have from doing this a lot that we can help them steer through.
No, I think that makes sense. I mean, I think honestly, many non-student entrepreneurs could use a cap table math class as well. And
Yeah.
so
And
I'm
there's
not
so many
surprised for
good
them
ones.
as
Like,
well.
yeah, like there's so like I feel like the law firms do a great job of doing classes on that. So, that shit's available, but
For sure.
maybe equals next class can be Dover equal will do a like cap table math
I
101.
mean, as you said, that's dry stuff, and so I'm gonna leave that to somebody else. But I think one of the challenges within tech and venture, not just recently, but historically, has been just lack of diversity across
Yeah.
many, many facets. I think in particular, one, the folks that are receiving capital from firms, and two, the folks that are, investors at those firms. I imagine that given the, university focus, that DRF probably skews better than most in this camp, but would love to kind of, hear how you're seeing things on that front.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because it's something that's really important to us as a community, right? I think as we've talked about, Dorm Room Fund has become a pretty killer on-ramp to the venture ecosystem, right? Whether that's from the perspective of students on the investing team who want to become investors full time, whether that's students on the investing team who want to become founders. And by the way, they are like my secret weapons. Like they are the most venture savvy founders you have ever met, or the Dormer Fund founders who are sort of learning the rules and have a helping hand from the DRF ecosystem. And from me and from Caroline and from the team to sort of help them learn the dance and then become sort of rock star founders. And so I think like given that proven pipeline, we sat down and said, hey, if we're graduating, taking the student investment team alone, right? If we're graduating 30-ish, 20 to 30-ish new potential investors every year into the ecosystem, we have a pretty powerful tool to make some pretty meaningful change in the venture ecosystem over time, right? Because you think about the
Mhm.
average venture fund and, you're maybe hiring a partner, right? Once every who knows how long, right? 5 years, maybe more, maybe less. Maybe you're hiring, principals every now and then, but Dormer Fund's doing it at speed, right? And so when we sat down and realized that there was a huge opportunity here. And then frankly, it was also a push from, something that I cared a lot about. So when I joined the team, I realized that there was some places we can make some change. And then it also came really organically from the students on the team who were like, hey, we're doing okay, but we could be doing a lot better. And so we've been incredibly intentional about how we've been attracting diverse talent to Dormer Fund. And so one of the major tools that we use are our summer track programs. So we built these over the last 6 years, and they are specifically targeted. So there's summer programs that are nights and weekends. So you can do them on top of your internship or your company that you're building or whatever. And they're sort of like boot camp programs, right, where we teach you the basics from the best. And so like you've been involved in the past in one of
Mhm.
them. I know, we did Blueprint Track, which is specifically for students who identify as Black, Latino, and or Indigenous. And we've have programs. I know Rick was involved with female investor track and female founder track, which are two programs that we run to sort of help those populations break in. And then we also have Prism, which is for our LGBTQ students who want to sort of learn the venture ropes. And what's really cool about these programs is that not only are we teaching them the concepts and the content, and we pair them with mentors, but then also that creates for us this like insanely talented pool of humans that we then can bring onto the DRF team, right? And so, it's been an incredible tool for us to make sure that DRF looks, and acts the way that we feel in our hearts. So, you look at DRF's team and we are really diverse, right? Like we are incredibly diverse. We are, white kids are in the severe minority on the team. And I left last year, the leadership team, we have 2 leaders on each of the regional teams. The leadership team is primarily female. And like we, 60%. And what's cool is that it has a trickle down effect into the founders that we meet and then ultimately invest in. And that was sort of my theory, was that if our investing team looks like our country, then, we're going to tap into unique pools of talent and opportunity. And so what's really cool is that for Fund 4, 60% of our founding teams have at least one female or gender nonconforming co-founder or founding member of the team. And so that's pretty cool, right? And we see some other really amazing stats in terms of ethnicity and background. And we also have had a ton of first generation college students on the team. We don't collect formal data about that, but I know from having gotten to know these students so well. And so, I was that, right? Like on my mom's side, I was the first one to go to college. And so it feels really cool to be able to see that coming to life at the DRF community. And so we're really excited. We're going to be launching those programs in a couple weeks, and hope we will have folks like you come back and
definitely.
No big deal. Just going to paint you into a corner here.
Welcome the opportunity. And and I think that once again, speaking to this, the quality of folks, we had DRF member Royce as an intern for us last summer, have spent, time with Jean-Claude, who's obviously now at XYZ, also a fellow Haitian, which I always appreciate with Inventure because we're few and far between. But no, you all done a great job in that respect of just like cultivating this community and continue to build it and like finding great folks at like probably the earliest stage in anyone's career. And so that's been great to see. And then maybe just like switching gears for a second, you mentioned a couple of times, dorm room is now independent, obviously from a vehicle perspective. What was the thought process in making it its own independent vehicle, and why go do that?
Yeah, so I was all proud of myself because I was like, oh, this is such a great opportunity. Like, we're going to bring in all these, additional resources and give us a bigger fund so that we can actually write more meaningful checks for our founders, because our 20K safe was not enough to get everybody out of bed anymore. And I was like, this is such a cool idea. And then I went back and reread Josh's announcement post of Dorm Room Fund in 2012. And he was like, our hope is that one day Dorm Room Fund can be a standalone fund. And I was like, God damn it, he incepted me. Right? But no, I mean, the truth is that we, with the support of the first round partnership, and they've been amazing, Bill Trenchard's my mentor and sort of taught me the venture ropes. When I first started at DRF, I was running DRF during the day and sitting at Bill's pitches at night. They've been incredible partners and mentors and supporters. Josh is, we call him the godfather of Dharma Fund. But we were sitting around and we were like, hey, this thing's working, right? Like the data shows it's working. So here are all these opportunities for growth. And what I realized was that in order for us to take the next level, step to the next level, we needed a bigger fund, right? Like we needed to be able to write more meaningful checks and like really help these founders, because 20K is great, but it's not really very much money. So we wanted to be able to like really like walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And in order to do that, I knew it was going to be a bigger vehicle than sort of historically what First Round had been carving off of their main fund. And so I said, hey, Josh, hear me out. If we go out and bring some outside partners in, folks that we know and love and trust, who've either invested in Dormer and Fund companies in the past or have been part of the portfolio in some other way, or mentors in our programming or things like that, that, you know, we could not only have a bigger fund, but we could provide so many more resources to the dormant fund founders and to the students on the investment team. And you know, and I think Josh sort of saw the light and got excited, but really what got him excited is that when you tell somebody that instead of them paying for you, that you're going to start paying them, like that's a pretty tough thing to say no to. So, you know, first round was our first LP. And we went out and were able to, it turned out there was market pull for the product, what every founder wants, right? And we were able to bring on some of the most incredible funds and GPs, and we got a university endowment in our very first fund, and some really incredible programs that and fund of funds that we've gotten involved in. And so it's really 10x what we can do as a community, and it's been amazing to see how all the stuff that's unlocked for us as an ecosystem. And so what's really cool is that, you know, there's enough deal flow too to go around, right? Like, you know, everybody's like, well, why would First Round do that? Don't they want like first dibs on everything? And the truth is that like they couldn't possibly invest in all of the dormant fund companies that we invest in because it's just a numbers game, right? And so it's been really cool to bring all those additional opportunities to our founders and additional like co-investors and resources and friends like you guys. And, you know, we've got Midas-less investors who are investors in our fund who are incredible assets and allies to me as a first-time fund manager. And so, you know, we're really lucky and it's gone really well, and knock wood, you know, we'll keep going. So
Nice. No, that makes a ton of sense there. And maybe putting all the serious DRF stuff aside for a second, when preparing for this kind of podcast session of you, I came across the fact that you used to be on the frontman of a country band. And so I need to hear more about this country band, and feel free to extrapolate how it applies to venture in any way possible. But if not, doesn't matter, because I want to hear about this country band story.
it's so funny. Of all the things I've actually done professionally that matter. um, so I worked for a tech company before I worked for First Round and Dormer Fund. And that tech company happened to have some just like insane Juilliard trained musicians in the IT team. And I found out that they had a country band. And I just invited myself one day. And my friend Craig was like, yeah, you can come sing with us. So I trained in college as an opera singer. That's my other funny little fun fact. And he's like, yeah, you want to come sing a country song? Like, that's cool. And one thing led to another, and it was a glorious, brief existence that we had at a really shitty dive bar on like 9th Avenue on like Wednesday nights. The band was called Shotgun Molly and the Empty Shells. And the truth is that it really was my friend Craig's band. And so like if Craig's ready to bring the band back, I'm there in a heartbeat. But you know, what does it have to do with venture? So I would say the boring answer is like it makes you good at public speaking. Like you can't be shy and be up on a stage as a country band singer. The good answer would be, I think that it pushed me to be comfortable being a little silly in public, right? Like trying on crazy shit and seeing what happened. I think it showed me the value of being authentic, right? Because nobody wants a robot, you
Right.
know, singing on a country band. But honestly, like the biggest takeaway for me was the value of preparation, because winging it is really fun, right? Like winging it is super fun for the person doing it because it's like an intellectual exercise, right? You're like, oh shit, like can I pull this off, right? And I think that's why things like, you know, the bluegrass jam at Sunny's on Saturday night exists. And by the way, if you ever want to come do that with me, Rich, you know, you're more than welcome. But everyone appreciates mastery, right? Like when you've put the time in and you know shit cold and you've done it a million times and you've clearly like worked your ass off to really wrap yourself around something, whether, you know, it matters to your bandmates, it matters to the audience, right? Like they can tell when you are living inside something because you've done it so many times that it's just part of you, right? And I think that's true in venture, right? Like I think all of those things are true in venture, but I think like whether it's your fundraising pitch or your, you know, or your area of expertise as an investor or your, you know, product area as a founder and like your competition, like people, it's just so satisfying when someone really knows their shit, right? And you can tell immediately when someone's like really done the work. And so I feel like that is the ultimate, you know, you can't fake it when you're
Yeah.
up singing in front of a room of people. So I think that was my big learning.
No, that's helpful. No, and it goes back to, I guess, just that student ethos, right? Continuing to be a student allows you to have mastery and be prepared.
Yeah.
But you know, that is all I had. And so I thank you very much, Shotgun Molly Fowler, for this session, and can't wait to continue to see Durham Fund continue to scale.
Thank you so much, Rich. This was really fun. I appreciate it, man.
Awesome.